Yeah, I was wondering if you were gonna start recording GoPro. Silly GoPro. All right, I guess we'll get it in its usual position. I always forget how incredibly wide the lens is and how much fun it would actually be to shoot like an entire movie on the super wide setting on this lens. Let's see here. What am I doing today? Today I am finishing looking at the last 2 days of dailies, and from there figuring out how I'm going to edit the movie. So I took a call from one of my friends earlier today, Mario, one of my oldest friends, and it made me think, like, even though I've talked a lot about like the movie that I wanted to make and like how it came together, I didn't really talk about like the inspiration for it. What is the movie about? Why did I want to tell this particular story? And like, I'm saying like a lot. Maybe I should change the camera angle. Should I make like a cooler camera angle? Is this like too boring? Even though I've like changed shirts, is this too boring an angle? So, I mean, okay. It's difficult in some ways to talk about why you make a movie, because you're not allowed to say, I wanted to make a movie just to make a movie, because they say you have to tell a story you're passionate about. And so there's this idea that you can't just be satisfied with the craft of making a movie. You can't be satisfied with film craft. You have to take it to some, like, other level. And it's just, I don't know, it feels kind of like, I don't know. It's hard to, because like, I would say, and you guys can judge, that I'm not a particularly great storyteller. I think that there are people out there who are much better at telling stories than me. So this idea that like you have to make a movie because you had to tell this one story, I feel like is misleading, and it kind of cuts out the people who like the actual craft of doing this. It's like a side thing. Like, and I think that's probably another reason why a lot of my favorite, like, I'm not a huge writer-director guy. I'm like a big director guy. So, for example, like Martin Scorsese, he felt like he had to make Who's That Knocking at the Door. I don't know if it was because he had to tell that story, or if it was because he wanted to just make a movie, So they would say that, like, you don't want to put the cart before the horse. The cart would be making a movie. The horse would be telling the story. And I don't know. I always feel uncomfortable because I am less of a storyteller and more of like a crafting artist. I mean, like, if you look at where are they? My thing about telling a story I wanted to be a comic artist, and my thing about telling a story in comic books was that I liked drawing. I like drawing the panels, like I like isolated moments. I like doing, oh, here it is. This body bio. This is what I'm most proud of. I did it really quickly. I'm proud of this stuff, right? Like, I'm proud of being able to draw and telling a story through. I need to start drawing again. If I've learned anything, I need to start drawing again, because, like, I'm not the best artist, but always look back at your old stuff. You're going to see all the stuff you don't like, but you're also going to see a lot of stuff that you do, a lot of stuff that works. So always look back at your old stuff. Okay, so I wanted to make a movie. After you decide what you want to do, then you kind of have to figure out, like, okay, well, how am I gonna do it? And the way that you do it is by figuring out the story you want to tell. And I had trouble figuring out the story we wanted to tell. I think I said this earlier about how we had come up with a story, but I didn't love the story. That's not true. I actually really liked the story. I just wasn't sure how we were going to do it. So instead, you write a story based off of the constraints you have, right? Like you put up a set of constraints and then you create a story based off of that. So that's what I did. I knew I wanted to make it about friendship and loyalty, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to say about either of them. Let's see, do I have any? Take a look. Let's go on a little journey, guys. Let's get a little light for this journey too. All right. So like, I like samurai movies, right? This isn't a full list of my movies. Here are some of my movies. But as you can tell, I'm a big fan of like Japanese culture. I'm a huge fan of samurai movies. You know, I've got a bunch of Kurosawa films. Huge fan of Sanjuro and Yojimbo. You know, like big fan of Star Wars. So I knew I wanted it to be like my friends. I guess it would. I'm kind of like another American obsessed with Japanese culture. Huge Usagi Yojimbo fan. Okay, so you figure out that. So that's to probably be the weirdest shot in the whole thing because I'm readjusting. So I wanted it to be about Bushido, honor, glory, sacrifice, and tell it through that lens. I wanted to do a modern version of a samurai. I'm obsessed with like the modern interpretation of sort of like historically chivalric figures. I don't even know if I'm using that word right. But like, you know, what's the modern interpretation of a knight? You know, what's the modern interpretation of the samurai? And you get to things like Shadowrun, the I guess everyone knows it as kind of like, it's kind of similar to Cyberpunk, but Shadowrun is a tabletop RPG, and they don't have strict classes, but they have categories of characters, and one of the categories you could be is a street samurai, and I thought that was kind of cool. It was like they have their own street knowledge, and that's where you get into like Yakuza films, right? Like the Yakuza have been glorified as being the modern version of the samurai, even though that couldn't be farther from the truth in some regards, actually, because both of the samurais were assholes, because like both samurai and Yakuza were kind of assholes, that it is kind of similar. But you see that happen, and then you look and you see like Yakuza films, okay? So maybe I want to make a gangster film, and maybe I want to make it kind of like a Yakuza film. And then you look at American gangster films, because we live in America, and you can do an interpretation of another culture's gang system, or you can do an interpretation of your cultural gang system. Or you can be like me and millions of other filmmakers, including Francis Ford Coppola when he made The Godfather, and not even bother doing actual gangs, but do movie gangs and research gangs. So then it gets a little bit easier, because now you're thinking, okay, I've got archetypes, I've got these things that I can play around with. And then I guess if you're playing around with it, your goal should then be to deconstruct it, right? Like, that's the whole purpose, is like deconstructing the main character's belief and philosophy system. Of course, then if you were a good writer and not me, you would then read about philosophy. You'd take notes on things like Sartre and Kant and nihilism and things like that. And instead, I just watched Breathless for my nihilism stuff. So yeah, I had a couple of things like that in place, but then like they always say you need to bring your own personal element to it. You need to bring your own thing. And so that's when I thought of like, okay, a huge chunk of the movie should be sort of like their last night. If I had one night left with my best friends, what would I do? And I would probably lean into some nostalgia. I am older. Almost all my friends are in serious relationships or are married. A couple of them have kids. It's harder to get everyone together. And so it's easy to reflect on times when we would all hang out. And in those times that we hang out, a lot of it would be like, you know, we'd harken back to when we were kids. You know, we have a bunch of sleeping bags. We throw sleeping bags on the floor. We play video games all hours of the night until someone finally says, and that person knows who they are. Someone finally says, you know, ugh, I'm tired. Let's go to bed, guys. So that was the other linchpin, is I wanted to call back to those things. But also, I think like many people, you find that you have what you think are your, what you think are your deepest conversations. You'll have those like at the end of the night, right? I've had many occasions where I've stayed up all through the night talking to various people, friends, girlfriends, things like that. And there's a bit of like a romantic notion to it when it comes to women, and there's a bit of like a bonding moment when it comes to to friends. And then, there's something special about like watching the sunrise, right? So I knew I wanted that. And then the rest of it is like how do I construct this story? Well, I want it to have a spine. And since it's a deconstruction, it should start with the main character having a belief. And for a lot of this, I use Story Genius. But the main character should have a belief, and that belief should be turned on its head. However, in order for him to have that belief, in this case, killing his best friend, or needing to kill his best friend, you have to create that dynamic. And that ended up being a lot harder than I thought it would be. And that, I think, is something for another day. I'm going to get to finish watching these dailies, do a little bit of practice color grading. I came up with a couple of cool images before, a couple of things I liked. That's not it. Let me see if I can find it in the folder. Let's see here. Is it under photos? Color graded stills. Let's see if they're coming in here. No. Set photos. Yeah, I don't know where it went. I thought I'd. It's disappointing. All right, behind the scenes, audio backup. It's in here? No. I don't know. I have to find it now. I'm sad. I really liked it. Maybe it's in my media folder here. Let's see here. Well, this is a super